Welcome, everybody. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Annie States, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today to our online forum debate on office lighting for an aging workforce. Before we get started, I would like to direct your attention to the right side of the screen where you should be able to see a Q&A box and a chat box. If you are facing any technical difficulties, please state them in the chat box and our technical representative will do their best to help you resolve the issue. If you have a question or you want to react to anything that is being said during this discussion, please use the Q&A box and the forum panel will address these for you. Prior to this prior to this event, we did some outreach via social media to find some burning questions on the topic of office lighting and an aging workforce, and we will use those questions to get the discussion started together with some supporting slides, but feel free to chime in using the Q&A box. I would first like to introduce our panel members today. We have Valerie Fletcher. She's an executive director of the Institute for Human-Centered Design, and she's very passionate about translating research into practice in the field of human-centered design. And then we have Bianca van der Zande. She's a proposition developer at Philips Research, who loves to explore new opportunities and go-to-markets where Bianca can be the connection between the research side and the business side. And then last but not least is Patricia Rizzo. She's a lighting application developer at Philips, and she has a vast experience in lighting design and a focus on light and health. So that's our team for today. So we first want to start out with some numbers that give an indication on the demographic shift that is happening in our workforce. So I would like to give the floor to Valerie for that.
Good day. Thank you for joining us. We want to begin by stressing that we have an aging workforce issue to get smart about, because we have a phenomenon that has never occurred in human history before. We have a proportion of an aging population as a portion of the population that is greater than we could ever have imagined. And we're all lucky enough to live in a time where we have a 30-year average longevity bonus. So we've gained an average of 30 years to our lifespans in just 100 years. It's a measure of the scientific progress of the 20th century. You can see the chart in front of you, and rather astonishingly, we think commonly of an aging population as unique to the developed nations. And this chart really depicts that is actually only a portion of the story. It is certainly true in the developed nations, but it is just as true in the developing nations. So this is truly a global phenomenon. So those of you who may be designing in China, for example, are actually looking at the phenomenon of a rapidly aging society as much as if you are designing in Western Europe or the United States or Japan. Next slide, Emmy. I want to speak for a minute about the demographics in the United States. I have the most specific information. We already have 89 million people in the U.S. over the age of 40 who have vision problems. And those are typical problems of the aging eye. Few people make it past 45 who don't need some kind of corrected lenses. This is quite recent data, and the statistics are from the National Eye Institute, the National Institute of Health. But within this population, and this is really the population we're particularly interested in today, nearly 17 million of them, or 19%, have chronic visual impairments that cannot be fully corrected with contact lenses, with eyeglasses, or with surgery. Next slide, Emily. The other thing that's a big priority here for us in the United States is that we are looking at a workforce in which people are not retiring at the predictable rates that they did at 55 or 60 or 62 or even 5. So we're looking at expected age of retirement fundamentally being reinvented, partly because we have to, partly because we choose to. And you'll see in this chart, we're looking already in the United States at a workforce that is already 35% of the total born before 1964, and that we're looking at the expectations of retirement, in which people are saying almost 40% want to retire at 66 or older, and 10% want to retire never. We presume and hope that those are the ones who actually love the work they're doing and wouldn't want to retire. Thank you.
A bit on the European demographics, I think the trends are quite similar to those in the US. If you look at the aging demographics, you will see that also Europe does have an aging population. So, for instance, that will mean that people between the age of 45 and 59 will have about 30% in 2030 of the total population. And if you look into the 60-plus generation, there you see that this participation rate for workers will even shift more from 4% to 16%. And as Tammy already mentioned, it's a similar story in Europe that from 40 plus, of course, your eyes start to deteriorate, and that means that everyone will get somewhere some vision problem, and this will the percentage of people experiencing vision problems will increase in these populations as well. So I think this is demonstrating the relevance of this web seminar.
Okay. So let's tackle the first question that we got from the internet. Can you explain why eyes of a 60-year-old need twice or 5 times more light? So first we would like to give the floor to Patricia for this question.
Good morning. Well, unlike fine wine, our visual system does not age quite as gracefully. So basically, less light reaches the retina, which is necessary for vision as we get older. And if you look at the slide right in the center, that chart that shows all the yellow dots, you see that there's a severe yellowing of the lens as we progress. As the cells renew, dead cells remain in the center of the lens, absorbing more short wavelength light and causing an increased yellowing of the lens. So the lens becomes more rigid and cloudier. There's also crystallization of the lens, and this causes increased stray light, or light that's reflected back from the retina due to the accumulation of large protein molecules. So this makes the lens more opaque. So you see from the age of 6 months in the upper left, 0.5, down to age 47, right in the center, we've already occluded so much light coming through, so the transmission is very poor, and that's one of the reasons. It causes blurred vision, it's a source of disability glare. And then if you look at the graph in the upper right, the reduced retinal illuminance, you see the age in years across the bottom, the x-axis, and then up along the y-axis, the retinal illuminance from 0 to 1, which is 100%. The red arrow shows that by the time we're 50, we're already receiving only half as much light on our, back to the retina. So there's one of the big issues. We also have a longer adaptation time going from light to dark. There's a diminished darkness reflex. So in addition to smaller pupil size, the reflex that causes the pupil to dilate in the absence of light is diminished. And the pupil size, also known as senile miosis, is attributed either to muscle atrophy or a change in nerve distribution. So especially at low luminance levels. By the time we're 50, twice as much less light will reach the eye as compared to a 20-year-old. And then we also, if you look on the left, I think we've all experienced not having long enough arms these days, experience a loss of accommodation, which is really the ability to focus. So we have a diminished ability to focus, especially on near objects and especially at low light levels. This is called presbyopia. So in addition to this, all the age-related diseases that naturally occur as we get older, cataracts, glaucoma, diabetic retinopathy, macular degeneration. They all combine in virtually a perfect storm to reduce the amount of light that reaches the retina and causes us to need more light and more shielded light as we get older. So I think that's, you know, some of the reasons why we need so much more light at age 60 than at age 20.
Hi, Patricia. Thanks for this explanation. And what strikes me is that the visual system ages so gradually that people hardly are aware of it. And we are still in a time frame that people see vision as granted. Well, if we take the analogy, for instance, with the physical condition when you age, you can see that people do a lot of effort to maintain their muscle strength and their condition and so on. And actually, if you think about that due to the aging of the visual system, this system needs to work much harder to find the picture. That will, in the end, really create some fatigue or maybe even headaches for people. Well, Annie already put this picture on it, which I think is very illustrative to actually notice how hard your eyes need to work to create an image out of this. It's all related with muscles. It should be trained, it costs energy. So yeah, I think that having said that, awareness in this, especially aging workforce, on how to support the nearby visual parts, yes, it's a very interesting theme to discuss.
Okay, I hope that answers the question. So let's move on. There are a couple of questions coming in during the Q&A. We will first do one or two more questions that we originally got from the internet before we move on. So first let's address what are the things an older employee struggles with most in relation to lighting. Valerie, do you want to take this away?
Thank you, Annie. I think it's important to remember as we're considering solutions that more light as a simplistic solution is not enough by itself. So we're looking at these four kinds of changes that we need to anticipate as we design environments that would work for a population that includes an older worker. The need for longer adaptation time between bright and dark, increasing difficulty with color discrimination, and I think Patricia has shown a nice illustration in her references a few minutes ago. Increasing need for contrast, which is really looking more at the architecture, the interiors environment, and offers us lots of opportunities to make changes that are not wildly expensive or terribly complicated. And then the visual acuity decreasing, especially in no contrast situations, that mix of lighting and contrast. Thanks, Cindy.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe shall I jump in here? Because I think these are the vision experiences that elderly have, but we might also consider some aspects of well-being. So what if people need to conduct a nearby vision for 8 hours during the day because they are working behind the computer screen, and what does it take to do that? So I think also factors like originating from this vision can be seen in the daytime, or the fatigue of your eyes, or the alertness during the day, or maybe even your evening fatigue. And quite interestingly, from the scientific field studies, there is a group in Sweden, for instance, that studies the effects of the lack of accommodation response with the neck muscles and the brain area. And we actually found quite interesting effects in that area as well. That they can see that the neck and back muscles do have a relation with this aging, the vision that people have. And I think in that context it's very interesting, again, if you think about ergonomic design.
Thank you, Bianca. Patricia, do you also want to chime in?
Yes, I think I would also add that I believe people still experience glare very strongly as they get older, and they don't have the ability to control light source brightness in their work environment at times. There may be imperceptible flicker from older technology, whether they have the magnetic ballasts from fluorescent luminaires that are only cycling at 60 hertz per second instead of 60 kilohertz. So there are issues that may be out of their control right now, and that could be, a big part of what they complain about, not having personal control over their little space, their environment, whether it's, lighting or in combination with the physical surrounds is an issue.
Thank you for that, Patricia. So I hope that kind of answers the question. So let's move on to we still have one slide that we kind of forgot. That was
okay. Yeah, this might be a nice one as well. That I was thinking about it. Yeah, that vision is far our most important sense we have, and that's demonstrated in this picture. And that also makes that 50% of our brain capacity is actually used to translate the information captured by our eye into vision. And I think this is again relevant because if that also means that you experience your environment quite a lot via vision, and their lighting design might come up again, especially for the aging visual system.
Okay, thank you, Bianca. Okay, the next question we had, did I now skip? No, sorry. The next question I had is, how can you design office lighting and accommodate different worker age groups? Again, I would like to call on Valerie to tackle this one.
Thank you, Emmy. I'll begin. I think part of what we want to be very clear about is that we're not suggesting that we create age ghettos in offices where we have some very unique and special conditions that would work for older workers. We're really looking at an office environment that understands the critical value and necessity for flexibility in the solutions that we offer. Given that most of us will spend part of every day in a multitude of spaces within a workspace, we've really got to be thinking about making the entire workspace flexible. And I think we can also frame that in terms of personalization of worker solutions that complements this very nicely. And that personalization is something that probably our youngest employees have a keen appetite for. And it may be less critically necessary for them, but it is still something they enjoy and prefer. And I think that's really our starting place, is that we're looking at flexibility and recognizing that this is really about enhancing every worker's experience. And I'll pass that on to our research and practice experts.
Patricia, do you care to comment?
Yes, hi. I totally agree. I think the beauty of the tools we have today allows us to customize our environment. So providing individual control will give workers a sense of satisfaction, the ability to change the color temperature and the light level to suit their own needs. would be very helpful. We know that higher color temperatures, similar to daylight, have been shown to improve alertness and, mood and feeling of well-being. And now with the LED technology, it's so much easier to do that because we have the ability to tune white light. So we can change according to our preference. And light-colored surfaces, I think, are very important too in an office environment because that affects the amount of light reflected off a surface. If you have a dark surface, certainly less light will be reflected. So what we see is luminance. It's not illuminance. It's not the amount of light that falls on a surface, but what is reflected off a surface is what we see. And that's what leads to brightness, which is what we perceive as brightness. So to be able to impact or optimize the amount of light that we're receiving at the eye, we can integrate, the surrounds to better do that. And creating different areas where it's not uniform everywhere, where there's little areas of interest. So there's, pockets of differences in luminance, so that maybe there are graphics on the walls with accent lighting or some burst of color somewhere as an area of interest, things that will improve just your mood and concentration, that you're not stuck in a monotonous environment. And I think lighting can certainly support that.
Okay, thank you, Patricia. Bianca, you also care to comment?
Oh, yeah, I can say some words. I totally agree with Patricia and Valerie that personalization is key in the creation of psychological comfort, and there are already some research studies in the literature that demonstrate that. Jennifer Fitch made some nice papers on that one. And for me, it's then also the biggest question in how to address personalization in the office design. And I think maybe this links a bit with the question that popped up in our Q&A about how we envision task lighting for office lighting. And then I think if you take that theme of personalization a bit bigger, I think we have different routes to address that. First of all, you can indeed think about your personal lighting at a desk level just by additional lamps and on the desk or next to the desk. But as important is, I think, that the people, and especially the younger age, but I also think the older age, they want to choose the atmosphere that they want to work in, depending on the task of that day. So I think also in the total office design, you should think about creating zones of concentration, relaxation, just different environments. I think that's also a way to address personalization. And then, of course, you also could think of separate spaces where people just can address the lighting conditions, on what they want to do or how they want to experience the space. So I think it's really an interplay between architectural design and atmosphere supporting people's activities where they have a choice in. So that's a bit what I would like to add.
Okay.
So,
thank you, Bianca. I hope that answers the question. To the audience, if you have questions, you can please fill in the Q&A box that you send it to all, so all the panelists will be able to view the questions. Okay, so let's move on to our next question. I hope the question that came in about task fixtures was answered appropriately. And we're moving then on to the next one. How can lighting support concentration, or how can lighting support creative tasks? Valerie?
Thank you, Amy. I think the context we're thinking about here, the context we're always talking about when we're talking about office design today, is based on an assumption that the modern workplace is about creativity and brain power. This presumption that is always about the primacy of collaboration and work as a social activity. And I think we've seen lots of models of workplaces that have been designed with that in mind, that we are always sort of working together. In truth, the research actually says that we actually spend a lot more time in quiet work alone, particularly because most of our work is concentrated in computers. The most reliable study that has been verified just last year in 2014 came from Bosky, a workplace research enterprise here in the United States. And they looked at managers, professionals, technical and administrative. And managers were the only ones that averaged only about 50% of their time working alone at a computer in quiet work. Professionals, technical staff, and administrative all were more than 60%. So I think when we're thinking about solutions, we've got to be thinking about this respect for what people are actually doing all day. And it is a mix. God knows we spend a lot of our time working with others, whether that's meetings or collaborative review of designs or whatever we may be working on. But we need to be thinking about spaces that have been designed to the reality of how we spend our time. So places to concentrate, probably the most critical. But next, places to collaborate, that it is well designed as the places to concentrate. And I think that's the sort of ideal that we need to shoot for, always with this idea of a blend of flexibility and personalization. And now I'll turn it over to our experts.
Patricia?
Yes, no, that's so true. I think with, again, the ability to tune our lighting these days will allow us to either provide an energizing environment through higher color temperatures or the introduction of some color, or a calming environment with lower light levels and just being supported by the feeling that you would like. It's almost a quietness that you can create, similar to acoustically. Lighting can also support that or affect it. So with the ability that we have now with the tools that are provided to us, I think people have to start thinking about, employers have to start thinking about how they design spaces so that there is this ability to create it or tailor it to the moment. So if there's a brainstorming session and you have whiteboards everywhere, as some of our spaces do here, you have bright white light and people are animated and there's a uniformity and that's energizing. And then when you're, hunkering down to write a report, you just go off to a smaller space and you lower the level and maybe you put on your headphones. So it's just kind of a holistic approach that lighting can play a part in.
Thank you, Patricia.
Yeah, maybe some words from my side, linking it into the scientific research that has been reported. I very much agree with Patricia and Valerie, so I don't need to add there. If I read the question in what kind of processes, physiological processes in the human body will happen with respect to certain light conditions, then I think that we can fairly say that lighting is able to influence people biologically, especially on the sleep-wake cycle, for instance, which is the most investigated effect of light, of artificial light on humans, but also on the direct alertness kind of aspect, and that all goes for the receptor mechanism, as it's called in literature. So it's a non-visual part of the brain. And then, of course, lighting affects the people physiological and visually. And what has been done in literature, especially in laboratory studies, people tend to investigate brain waves with respect to different lighting conditions. And there you can find some evidence that bright light is able to influence and support the brain areas required with repetitive tasks, or while a bit more dazed warm lighting conditions can support the more creative tasks in the brain. I think to be very bold on this type of visits is still a bit, I don't want to say this too bold, to be honest. But also, if you then go from laboratory studies to field studies and measure effects of different light conditions, then I think especially in the education area and primary schools, you can see that indeed bright light can help children to concentrate better or to perform better on their literacy skills. If you then ask what is that mechanism, I think that's not settled out yet. It probably will be a combination of all these three effects that artificial light can have. So biologically, physiologically, and visually. So I think that's what I would like to add on this question from the scientific side.
Thank you, Bianca. Meanwhile, we've gotten in another question from the participants. How do you address issues like adaptation and glare architecturally? Whom from our panel members would like to address that one?
I could take a stab at it. As far as adaptation, I think architecturally the spaces need to be designed so that there are transition zones, that there's a balance from bright daylight to interior darkness, so that you're not going from, severe contrast of one type of lighting to another. So you have that ability to, transition through a zone that balances both, and that can also be accomplished through controls, as we know. And that's certainly easier if you have your own, personal ability to do that. But if it's in a larger environment, then there needs to be a building system that, accommodates that. And glare, again, I believe it's a control issue. If there's bright daylight, if there's the ability to, control that with some type of shading or external louvers or however, because of the orientation of the building. And then with the interior luminaires, the lensing and the distribution would certainly help in that regard. Valerie, do you have any comments on that? You probably have something great to add.
Thanks, Patricia. I think the thing that we're really paying a lot of attention to these days, and I want to stress that this is still at an early stage, and there really aren't the tools that we might use while designing to test these conditions. But thinking about the relationship between lighting and the surfaces that are lit, whether we're talking about floors or walls or ceilings for that matter, or the choices we have in materials for any aspect of the interior, including our furniture and surfaces. But thinking about the balance of light in terms of the light that is reflected. So we illuminate now, but we don't understand a great deal about the luminance that is created through the intersection of the illumination we create or the illumination we orchestrate with sunlight and what bounces off the surfaces that we choose. And I think we need to get a lot better at really understanding how to control that in a way that minimizes glare and maximizes the value of reflected light. And I think this is a frontier area that I think we're going to see very rapid progress in the next few years.
Thank you.
Shall I add?
Yeah, if you want.
Maybe if you look at the term glare, I think glare is always the perception of brightness as compared into its environment. So I think that's probably what you meant indeed with the term luminance. It's very important what the contrasts in luminance are. If it's, we have very dark, bright areas in your space, or is it very uniform? And I think there is the balance. And what you can see now with LED is that you get quite an opportunity to integrate lighting or illumination into other form factors. So there is such an innovation on ceiling illumination, for instance. You can see that the general lighting is not coming out of one luminaire anymore, but from a whole ceiling panel, which has as a fact that it's a very low brightness where the light actually comes out, and as a result has a very low glare rating. So I think, yes, indeed, in the coming years, I completely agree that a lot of innovations will come to address glare, either in design or even in illumination design, if I can call it like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Bianca. Moving on to the next question then. What would you advise employers to advise their older workforce? Who wants to kick off?
Emmy, if this is Valerie, I can begin on that one. I think that the starting answer there is to really recognize that the most expensive aspect of the cost of doing business is the cost of one's employees. And I think the focus should be on what does it take to maximize the satisfaction and performance of those workers. I mean, no matter what sort of configuration of costs one looks at, there simply is nothing that competes with the cost of workers. So starting from that perspective, I think we need to be thinking about making the case that design is a tool for maximizing satisfaction and performance, and that we need to get people to look at design not as a received wisdom from some unknown party, but as something that we collaborate, the users and those that are responsible for providing the solution, to really understand what can work best. I mean, we love to work with clients who actually will take the time to test solutions to see what works, so that people really engage in a participatory process of really educating everybody about what's effective. Unfortunately, absent that kind of attitude, we often see older workers silent about what has become a functional limitation relative to sight, blame themselves for difficulties they're having, don't see it as a problem that can be solved. And I think that's the internal culture that we really need to change, and to look at design as a quite modest investment in enhanced satisfaction and performance. And I'll turn it over to the experts.
No, I would agree with Valerie. Everyone needs to voice their needs, because it's just not understood by, especially, you know, a population where many of the employees are younger, or maybe some of the management is younger, so it's just not recognized, or they're not aware. So voice your needs, and chances are that if it's something that's going to help one, it's going to help many. And, you know, these improvements need to be organic. And with lighting, it's one of the most important and one of the most manageable things that we can do today.
Yeah, nothing to add. I completely agree.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bianca. Let's move on to the next question. We have another question from our listeners come in. I will read it out loud. Has health and well-being taken over from energy saving as to where people put their attention now? So, Bianca, maybe you want to try to this one?
Okay, so please, Patricia and Valerie, add if you like. But what I think is that energy saving and sustainability are always key factors. We are obliged to take care of our environment. So we have to be conscious about paper usage, temperature, waste production, and also energy usage. So I think it always must be taken into account. But I do not think that excludes human-centric design in that context. I think especially with smart connected lab solutions, we will get much more ways to generate more and better light, while still being far or even lower on energy consumption than the old fluorescent solutions, for instance. So I think in the end, it will be the interplay between people, planet, and profit in the ecosystem of a working environment. So what I think is that energy saving will become a high factor, but we always have to take it into account. So that's what I can say. Maybe someone can add a bit more.
This is Valerie. I'll step in for a second and just point out that I think it's a very good fortune that someone brought up this issue of health and well-being, because I do think that it's a rising trend and a legitimate and important trend. In our work, we are very much invested in getting people to pay attention to that three-legged stool that often doesn't get unpacked when we talk about sustainability. So we know that it's environmental and economic, but also social sustainability. And social sustainability we often don't really spend a lot of time thinking about. We presume that it's about sort of a mother and apple pie aspect of sustainability. And I think, in truth, it's actually where we hit this issue of human diversity, and particularly the human diversity of our time. And in some ways, we pay the keenest attention to environmental sustainability because we clearly have a desperate need to act with a sense of urgency on that. And I think we need to be thinking about the phenomenon of human diversity as perhaps a positive byproduct of the same period of time which has landed us in such trouble on the environmental side. But on the social side, it's landed us in a wonderful place where we live longer and survive more. But it doesn't mean that we don't have urgent needs to design and think differently. And I think the very practical issues we're talking about today are really at the center of socially sustainable design. And I think finding the pattern that allows us to make responsible design decisions that are environmentally sustainable, but also socially sustainable, supporting of well-being and health, is really the charge of the moment that I think the most progressive folks are really grappling with simultaneously. Thanks.
And if I could just jump in, I would say I think we're so fortunate that we're at a point that we can focus on health and well-being, because energy savings have become almost innate. We're probably not going to extract much more savings from the extremely energy efficient technologies we have today, even with the introduction or the exposure to daylight that we're introducing because of the connection to nature and the need to have that. So with daylight harvesting and all these sensors and ability that we have to save energy, because the luminaires now, are so energy efficient to begin with, we're probably, at a point where we've maximized what we can do that way, and now we can focus on, this point forward and just improving the environment for health and well-being and feelings of mood and concentration and productivity and alertness and the ability to not disrupt sleep cycles and disturb appetite. We have, so many benefits with the ability to tune spectrum and intensity with lighting these days that we can focus on that a little bit more than the energy story, which is kind of taking care of itself, I believe.
Moving on, another question that comes in. Technology is enabling personalization, but how does this affect the physical workspace? Will people need bigger work areas for personalization to be effective?
This is Valerie. In our experience, the most exciting trends that we're seeing are an appreciation that we really need to be thinking about how we allocate the real estate in our workspaces a little differently. I think the notion that the cubicle was the dominant answer, and then a couple of conference rooms, and then some tiny spaces where someone may make a private phone call, may not quite be all that we need to do. We are looking at not much of a likelihood that we're going to see much larger personal allocation of square footage or square meters, but a reconfiguration so people have flexibility about where they can choose to work depending on what they're doing, including working alone, where you might be working at your usual workspace, but for you know, a change of your needs, your sense of the light, your sense of your own energy at the course of the, you know, in the course of the day, that you want to work in a different environment that gives you, you know, that oomph of being able to get work done more effectively. I think that we're seeing the most interesting outcomes where there is this opportunity to model change in the workplace and where employees have an opportunity to weigh in. So we're looking at employers who are offering at least a set of choices. It's not wide open. You know, it isn't like there are 25 choices of a desk type or a chair type or a task light, but that people, or, you know, the whiteboard or whatever you've got in your individual set of things in your very individual workspace. But we're seeing people give people the chance to actually do personalization at that level. And the buy-in can be extraordinary. We've recently worked with a healthcare insurer who did this for their entire multi-thousand person workforce and had a phenomenal response of worker participation and the outgrowth of worker satisfaction in a new workplace. They were moving their workplace, building out an existing building on 15 floors, and they were so successful in getting the participation of workers. It was very nearly 100% of people participated in the survey, reviewed actual mock-ups of the spaces that were options for them to weigh in on. So we're really seeing that participatory process as not necessarily allocating a lot more real estate to the individual, but getting the individual to actually have some say about the most basic aspects of their immediate environment, having to do with lighting and chairs and work surfaces. Thanks.
Thank you, Valerie.
Yeah, I think that Valerie, you explained it very well, and it's difficult for me to add something rather than have my personal experience in having these choices. I have the luck of working in different buildings and the choice in having different environments. But personally, I really recognize the need of people, at least of myself, to be able to have this choice. If I have an informal meeting, I will go to the coffee corner, or sometimes I like to have a bit nature around it. Actually, that's the only thing I still miss in offices. That's the outdoor office, to be honest. When the sun comes up, I would like to have a bit more of that. It's nothing serious to add.
Okay, thank you. Actually, that's a nice segue into the next question. Do you see a shift about how buildings are being created? Anybody from a panel wants to tackle that one?
This is Valerie. I'm speaking from the United States. I'd have to say that I've seen remarkable energy and creative drive among a particular design discipline in looking at these issues in a fresh way. And that's interior design. Interior design has come to be very savvy in terms of the integration of research. We're really seeing a professionalization that comes with a sense of really thinking in fresh ways. This isn't about choosing carpet and upholstery colors this is really thinking about the human experience of the indoor space, and I'm extremely optimistic that attention and valuing of research is going to be a really positive trend as we move forward. I think one of the things that I'd just like to make a pitch for is that as we look at a world in which we need so much information and need to develop so much varied expertise to do design competently in the built environment, I think we have to recognize that no single discipline has a handle on all the depth of knowledge that is necessary to create great spaces. And I think we have to be thinking about how do we sort of disperse expectations about the expertise that people will not only acquire in their educations, but constantly refresh in the course of professional development.
Okay, Bianca, you have anything to add?
My expertise is not so much in the architect of buildings, but what I know from the business side of view is it's always quite difficult also to bring in human-centric lighting designs into the building, because lighting is still often seen as just a basic need. And that basic need is then addressed in as the norms say, and the norms are more or less based on eliminating discomfort by setting out the minimal task level intensities, and also to set norms on glare. But I think what we should strive to in the end is to come to actually psychological comfort throughout the day. So my wish then from the lighting perspective is that we can do something about these norms on healthy environments. That will be my dream.
And this is Valerie. I just want to jump in for 1 second to make a point about research that we don't have adequately, and that's the cost-benefit analysis as it relates to these investment in worker satisfaction and thus in worker performance, and to actually think about how valuable it would be to be able to make the case for this investment as having long-term impact that's measurable. And I think it's one of the gaps in the research base that we really need to collectively make a case to pursue. Thanks.
Thank you, I agree completely. Maybe Patricia.
Patricia?
I was going to say that there is a recognition, there has been for years now, with the LEED certification that requires, in order to, get points for daylighting and the integration of lighting into the built environment, that buildings need to be designed now so that the interior does allow views to the outdoors in 75% of the cases, 75% of the spaces. There are all these formulas that they provide, but there is more of a recognition of, having that daylight surround most of the employees so that they always have that connection. So I think the architecture has, recognized that the orientation of buildings and the way the interior spaces are designed now, partitions and, obstructing views is no longer the case, that there is a serious attempt to, to maximize, the comfort that people have with being indoors, because they do have the connection to the outdoors.
Great, thank you for your answers. That kind of brings us to the end of the questions that we had. Maybe before we part, any closing statements, or did we cover anything? I'm probably sure there will be plenty of other questions, but any closing statements that anybody would want to make? It's not a requirement. Okay, then, Valerie?
Emmy, the only thing that occurs to me, and I run a small company that really values diversity of age in the workplace. And my team actually is literally from 21 to 81. And one of the things that I'd just like to point out is among our oldest workers, and this has always proven to be true, one of the things that they value greatly is the flexibility of time. So you're not even looking at people who are necessarily on site 5 days a week. And thinking about creating spaces that work well for people who are part-time. Because I think a lot of those people, maybe that 10% in the United States who intends never to retire, probably still don't want to be in the office from 9 to 5 every day. And thinking about that flexibility and just thinking about a world in which all of us have more choices for quality of life related to work and life balance. So I think all of these issues are ideally headed in that direction. But I think we need to be thinking about, when we're talking about older workers, particularly much older workers, we're probably thinking about people who contribute something invaluable, but they aren't actually sitting next to us every day of the week. Thanks, Emmy.
I really appreciate that answer, because we're all getting older, and we really need to also stay in the workplace much longer. Patricia, you want to add something?
Yeah, I think one thing we didn't touch on, which I guess we would need another hour, is our shift workers. It's not just the 9 to 5 workers that we're talking about, and the older workforce also includes nursing staff that are now working, into their 60s and 70s because they need to. It's not only, they don't have the option to retire, and there will be a shortage of nurses, in the coming years. So employers need to retain that type of workforce. So we have a lot of issues with the 24-hour rhythms and our biological clocks, and people who are not just working in, a well-lit office environment all day to deal with as well. So it's very interesting, and there's a lot of research that still needs to be done, that has been done, but there are a lot of opportunities now, and we have to embrace, who we are as a population and try to accommodate all of that. But it's interesting, and we all come from different places geographically. We're exposed to different amounts of light during the day, so the contrast from light to dark for each person is different. So that's why lighting is so personal. It really is. There is no one size fits all. And I guess we would have to wrap it up on that.
Yeah, well, a lot of thought here. Yes, I would like to wrap it up. We're getting close to the top of the hours. So thank you all for participating, and I hope to see you next time on a Philips Lighting Academy webinar or forum discussion. Thank you.